the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to show 8, lucky for some, of Grey Hat Beard. My name's Kevin McDonald. I'm the Grey of Grey Hat Beard. I'm a solutions architect at CPS.
I'm Alan Erdley. I'm the Hat, and I am also a solution architect at CPS.
Gary Trinder. So I'm also a solutions architect at CPS, Microsoft MVP and member of PMP team, maintainer of Office 365 CLI as well. You get that one in there.
You almost missed the CLI off the back of that, and that sounded really impressive for a minute. But the CLI is very impressive as well.
Yep.
So for anyone who's new to the podcast, this is Grey Hat Beard. We chat about topics related to Microsoft 365. We start with the first half. We just look at the news that we've seen recently, and then the second half, part 2, we go into a specific topic. So we just generally cover a few different topics around Microsoft 365, sometimes more specific. So last week we talked about governance and the Power Platform, other times a little more broad. So this week we're talking about how to work and how to get things done and be more productive. And as Gary noted as we were chatting in the beginning, something that many of us are struggling with at the moment, and many of us struggle with all the time. So we'll cover that in the second part of the show. One other thing I'd like to bring up, we are very open to having guests and ideas for the shows. If you go to greyhatbeard.com, have a look at the upcoming shows. There's a couple of forms there where if you've got an idea on something we can cover, please put something there. Or even better, if you'd like to appear on the show, we would love to have some other people on, involve a bit more, trying to hear some other voices as well. So it'd be really good to hear from people. But for now, let's get on with the show. And we're going to go into some news. So I'm going to kick off. What I've been up to, I've been doing a lot of bot framework stuff at the moment, which is something I've got a bit of a passion for. I love the AI stuff from Microsoft, and the bots are a great way of getting in there. I'm sure many of you are thinking, yeah, the big bot takeover that was talked about hasn't come, but there's still many cases, especially with Q&A Maker, the ability to surface information in a nice, easy, conversational way. It's definitely still going on. So hopefully share a little bit more on that in future episodes on there. Otherwise, found a very nice post, semi-related actually, and in the conversation we had talking about search. So there's a guy called Chris Tubb. Heard about this from Sharon O'Day, and another case of a name that until I actually started saying it there, I realised I've never said out loud. So apologies, Sharon, if I've spelled your name wrong or pronounced your name wrong there. But Chris has got a great post on search isn't working. And I think many complaints we get is the client search doesn't work. And usually it's not really about the search tool itself, but how the information architecture in there is managed, and how the flow of documents. Are you looking at the right document when you're searching for something? Are you bringing up the right thing? It's usually about how you've architected your layout. And Chris goes into some very nice detail here about some things, some areas to look at. So looking at one immense search index makes it even more painful. Can you get more logical, smaller indexes of that as well? So definitely worth a read. I don't know if you two have had much to do with search at all.
Oh yeah, many years of pain with search, and when it works, it is an absolute game changer. I think it's really interesting though when you say it doesn't work, because the reasons and the definition of it not working comes down to a lot around expectations. And I think this article covers quite a lot of that as well, in terms of the expectation management of, what is it that you mean when you say it doesn't work? Is it that I'm getting too many results, not the most recent results? So yeah, it's a good article, covers off a lot.
Yeah, it comes down to is your question being answered? And can you find it in the quickest way possible? If you have to then, you go to search isn't great. You then end up having to almost trial and error, go, ooh, maybe it was in this site, maybe it was in that site. Or you spend the next 10, 15 minutes spinning around different sites, and then turn around to Teams and just ask a colleague and go, that document that we're working on, where is it? And how do I get this information? So yeah, it's got getting search right has a big impact, because increase.
But I think it's also getting, because often the content isn't there. You know, you're searching for a process. What is the travel policy? And it turns out there isn't a travel policy, and all sorts of that. Or some teams have one policy, other teams don't. So getting search right is one thing, getting the information available and thought about. And I've just hovered on the screen on a great bit about user journeys. So questioning people, what is that journey for what you actually want to do, and trying to map those things out. I think it's really important. So it's a long old article, but it is one I've put into my saved ones that I'm pretty sure I'm going to be coming back to many times. So well worth a look at. Links are in the show notes. Other bit of kind of news rather than kind of interesting articles. Multi-geo. This is something for large organizations using Office 365, sorry, Microsoft 365, must get that right these days, where you have lots of different locations, lots of different international locations, and you have requirements for the data to sit within that location. So for example, in Switzerland, any content there must sit within Switzerland. And they've had multi-geos in SharePoint, I think probably about a year or so now. And I know it was announced a long time back, but it hasn't been in quite as long. What has changed now is that the requirements for the minimum number of seats that you have has been reduced to 250, which I think is great. Opening this up to a lot more people is important, because you don't have to be a massive organization to have your data in specific countries. So I think that'll be very interesting. So, something I have at a previous organisation tried to set up, and the organisation wasn't big enough at the time that we were trying to set it up for, and it's fair to say they weren't very happy.
This has been a long time coming as well. This has been, whilst it's absolutely critical for organisations that are global, the number of people that you need to actually need this in place has always been inconsistent with the numbers that you would needed to technically implement it. So this will be a game changer for quite a few organizations who are of that kind of, not, you know, monstrous size, just the normal multinational size. It will be a big change for them.
Yeah, I think it will really help, and especially, I know, those in financial services, lots of fintechs coming up, pharmaceuticals, lots of compliance reasons around that as well. So very useful. Final bit of news I had, and I'm quite excited about this. They've announced now the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. I got a little bit scared because I'll be honest, I've been stuck at home. I'm not the fittest at the moment, but I'm happily found out it's not a real marathon. So there's no running involved apart from into the kitchen to get cups of tea. What it is the SharePoint conference, which was cancelled and due for May, is effectively being replaced by this online session. Now, they haven't said it's the same thing. It's not entirely sure of the background and the politics around it. They haven't said it's a direct replacement for that, but all the people attending it, there'll be Jeff Teeper giving a keynote, Naomi Moneypenny, who's been driving the Project Cortex stuff, Bill Baer, a senior product manager at Microsoft, and John Levesque, who does a lot of the Power Platform evangelizing in Microsoft. They're all going to be speaking at it, and from what I'm hearing, a lot of the SharePoint conference announcements will be coming through on that. So definitely get registering. The links are in the show notes.
Another online conference. It feels like it's almost every day that there's at least 2 or 3 being announced. I feel like I'm getting a bit of online conference fatigue at the moment. There's just so many happening. Obviously, you know, it's great that we can actually have them, and we can still kind of share the knowledge, but it's maybe we need a targeted list of here are the ones that you should be looking at if you're interested in these things. It's a broad old subject that we're covering.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are so many coming out. I have a few to mention later on, but yeah, I think though the important one about this one is that if it does have announcements in it, it's not just I can go there and learn things. It is actually announcements. The other one on that is the Microsoft Business Applications Summit. So that one they announced this week is going to be online as well, and that one is going to be 6th of May. But that will also be, that's the one that was going to be in Dallas. It was going to be 2 days, and launching the Power Platform and Dynamics Wave 1 for for this year. So that one, yeah, there will also be announcements there. So, and it's only one day for that one, but it is US time. So for us Europeans, it does mean staying up a little bit late, well past my bedtime anyway. But yeah, be interesting to see
should say I don't think we know with either of those whether it's going to be recorded at all, but both are free, so there's no cost to those.
Yeah, it is free. So,
just good news. Yeah, it'd be interesting. Gary, anything caught your eye at all?
So one of recently on the PMP community call, it was Thursday, the new managed metadata REST APIs were kind of announced, shown off by people from Microsoft. So this is an interesting move because it's always been a pain. There's never been a dedicated REST API for managed metadata. We're always having to use some kind of old methods, but now Microsoft have picked that up and they're actually running with it, and it looks like it's nearly there. So hoping that will become available pretty soon. I think it's interesting because we talked about this previously about Project Cortex and how managed metadata is going to be a big kind of factor in how that's going to work. So this is kind of one of those building blocks that needed to be in place, I think, for Project Cortex to really kind of leverage managed metadata in SharePoint and also in Office 365 as well, because there's the managed metadata is going to move out of SharePoint up to a Office 365 level, so that can be shared across multiple services. So it's interesting to see that they're nearly there. So that bodes well for other services as well that are obviously going to depend on this going forwards.
I'll try and get in the show notes because I think they did a recording of that on Thursday on the PMP. So I'll have to admit I have to watch it first, but we'll share that.
Yeah, same. Yeah. I missed it. I caught up afterwards just with some of the notes that came out. But the PMP community calls are recorded. They're available on YouTube. So we'll put the links out. But yeah, if you Google, you'll be able to find it.
Or Bing. Other search engines are available.
Yeah. Oh, DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuckGo. Yeah.
Let's not forget DuckDuckGo. So the next bit of news is multilingual portals. So it's been around, kind of mentioned in targeted release, so you can enable it on your tenant. But again, this was another demonstration that was done on a PMP call, not last week, it was the week before, I think. So just giving a bit of an overview as to what multilingual portals are and what they aren't. So historically in SharePoint, we've had this multilingual kind of portals through a variation feature, which was a bit painful to actually use at times. The multilingual portals, it's a similar kind of approach. It's not variation.
Similar kind of pain.
It's yeah. So they're very kind of quick to say it's not variations. We're not kind of reinventing the wheel or reproducing what we've done before. But the idea is that you can have a page written in, say, English, and then say, okay, here are the languages that we can create multilingual pages from. So you could have something in French or German, and just write the relevant text in to the page. So you've kind of got a page that's in different languages that you can just kind of pick from a picker at the top of the page that'll show you the languages that are available. One thing that it doesn't have is it doesn't have auto translation, which is, I think I certainly expected it from the beginning. Because we've got cognitive services and making that a little bit easier, but it's not there. There are translations for the kind of the system level elements of the page, so like your menus and things like that, they will translate, but the content is just going to be what you put in at the moment. So it'd be interesting to see if that's going to come. I think that's naturally.
I imagine there'll be a community effort pretty soon. I would have thought to create a flow or create some sort of webhooks that can trigger that. Be interested to see how well they work and if people find out why they aren't auto translating.
Well, I think it's my experience of using using the variations on the previous versions of SharePoint means that you always want somebody to actually read it and make sure the translations are accurate as well. So I think that's always been the other challenge, is when you have an update, how you validate that translation is actually working.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's to speed up that process, though, isn't it? Say if you're a company and you need to publish articles in 5 different languages, if you can speed up that review process, that at least if you've got that cognitive services behind, getting it 90% right, and then someone who's native language speaker can go and review it and okay it all, that enables you to get your message out quicker as an organization. So but it is an interesting point, because obviously that's what we're talking about, is using something in Azure and cognitive services to translate that content, and obviously that's a different part of Microsoft than, say, SharePoint. So you've got 2 product groups that
but there's
work together and
there's a lot of overlap. If you look at Microsoft Search, a lot of the things that are happening in the Office 365 world are using a lot of Azure services, and I'm pretty sure they've said that Office 365 is the biggest Azure user because they use so many of the services there. So it's not, they're drinking their own champagne. They're using what they're providing. They're not recreating. So sorry, Al.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it is for me, it's the validity of the the nuance of the language, especially when you want to have corporate tone and things, so getting the translations done and then actually just tweaking them and tailoring them. But it also means you have that same process of, well, I've updated the English, do I now automatically update the French and the Spanish? So there's a lot of when you get into the minutiae of how you go through that process, it gets more and more complicated.
Yeah, I was going to say, if anyone's looking at implementing this, whether for their own internally or for clients, have a good look at the way different things can be set, because you can divert a page in a different language, you can put completely different content on there, and then you could sync it back. So there's a whole load of potential for royally screwing up a site. So I would definitely make sure you understood it well.
Yeah. So moving on from the multilingual portals, obviously the Microsoft 365 naming is now taking over. Office 365 was renamed to Microsoft 365, and now the Office 365 groups have been renamed to Microsoft 365 groups as well. So that was recently announced. I don't think there's any real change to that. It's just a marketing change. But again, it's the Office 365 brand, if you like, is starting. Well, I think the only place that it now appears is in the licensing, just to confuse people even more, because you've then got Microsoft 365 licenses and Office 365 licenses as well. But yeah, it's there's a lot of renaming going on, so probably check things and make sure that when you're talking about Office 365, do you actually mean Microsoft 365 now? So yeah, it's
and I think
change.
I think we talked a little bit about this last time, and if I'm honest, I didn't understand why they were doing it, and I thought it complicated things. And then, interestingly, where my wife works, they were emailing around spreadsheets, and I kind of just sighed hugely and said, why don't you use Office 365 where you can have collaborative spreadsheets, you can all work on the same one? So she asked their IT person, and the IT person said, no, we use Office 2013, we haven't rolled out Office 365 at all. I was kind of, that seems a bit strange. And basically his consideration was Office 365 was just a version for the desktop, had no idea that it was a cloud version and things like that. So I think there is a certain assumption that Office is about what sits on your desktop. So I can kind of see that certainly put a bit of a light bulb into the understanding of what of why they put things as Microsoft 365.
It's always a challenge, because if you look at Power Automate and the confusion that's caused. In terms of, well, you've still got Flow, but you've now got an umbrella product that covers multiple sort of other products within it. It's the same kind of thing, explaining the difference between Microsoft 365 and Office 365. Office isn't just one thing, it's a bunch of different services together under one license. And I think that's the key thing, is how do you license it versus what services do you get? Depending if you're talking to end users or IT, you're always going to have that conflict of, well, like, you've got a license for this, but you can use all of these services. So it's, yeah, it'll be something that I think we will continue to discuss for many, many months, if not years, if not forever. You're muted, Kevin.
Yeah.
Damn it, sorry.
An outtake there.
I could have got away with that as well. I was going to say it keeps us consultants having something to talk about, so and grumble about. If we had nothing to grumble about, we'd be very bored.
Always things to talk about. So the other things, pushed out a couple of articles this week. Managed to find some time over the Easter weekend to write a couple of posts. One was Office 365 CLI related. So if you've never used Office 365 CLI, you don't really know how to get started with it, but you're maybe using PowerShell at the moment, we want the CLI to go everywhere. It can be used on any platform, you can use any shell, but we know that the majority of people are happy using PowerShell. So we thought, I thought get a blog post out there of why you'd want to use the CLI, why you'd want to use it in PowerShell, how to really get started from the basics. So if you're interested, take a look at the article. Feedback is always welcome, either to me or back to the project in GitHub. And the follow-up article to this is using the CLI to report on private channels in Teams. So we're obviously doing lots of Teams work at the moment. Companies that have rolled it out, got enabled private channels in there, don't know that they've got them created because they're hidden in the SharePoint Admin Center. They're very well hidden in the Teams Admin Center as well. So if you ever need to discover quickly how many you've got, where they are, there's a post that I've done that's got a one-line script using the CLI to pull that data out for you and stick it in a CSV, which hopefully be able to then manage your Teams rollout a bit easier, knowing where things have been created.
And in this day and age of people rolling out Teams in response to the current situation, it's one of those factors that, when Teams first launched, I always remember going into SharePoint, the classic SharePoint admin sites, and saying, so administrators, do you know how many Teams you've got? No, we don't have any. Can't see any in the classic admin.
Yeah, no one's using it.
Have a look at the new one. Oh wow, there are hundreds of them.
Yeah,
so it is one of those hidden things that you really need to be able to see. So it's a great script to be able to actually use that to get visibility of those private channels.
Yeah, I think it's the pain that comes with them, because whilst going on, like you're saying, lots of companies are rolling out Teams, there's lots of considerations there. You're not just creating Teams, you're creating Office 365 groups, you're creating SharePoint sites in the background. You're affecting lots of things. It's not just one thing in isolation. You're creating multiple objects without really knowing as well, if you don't know the architecture. So it can really easily end up with a bit of a mess. Trying to keep on top of that and where the gaps are in the admin centers, the reporting's not there really for this kind of discovery. So scripts are going to be very important to go through the graph and to pull out information from your tenant. So I think we're going to have more and more of these appearing, no doubt. So one of the bit of news, so still on the CLI, we welcomed a new team member, Albert Jan Schott, who's CTO of Portiva in Holland. Yes.
Netherlands.
Yeah. Netherlands. Yeah. I was thinking it's not Belgium. It's definitely
not Belgium.
Holland. Yeah. So he joined the team. So there's now 4 of us leading the CLI initiative. So we're seeing a lot of take up recently, which is really, really good to see. Lots of people wanting to use the CLI on different platforms, which is really encouraging, because that's what the cloud's about. It's not about being on Windows all the time. It's about automation in the cloud, running on Linux, running on Macs. So it's really interesting to see the take up. So hoping that we're going to be able to expand and do more great things.
Excellent.
Good stuff. A quick apology that my wife decided now is the perfect time to put the washing on with the very loud washing machine next to me. So I hope the noise isn't coming through too much. But Al, any news from you?
The joys of working at home, hey.
I know.
I think the big thing for me this week on Tuesday, they talked about the SharePoint 2010 extended support, which, as a consultancy, we've got a fair few clients who are looking at frantically trying to get off SharePoint 2010, as the extended support was due to end in October this year, and they've now extended that by 6 months to April next year, which I think gives a significant amount of breathing space for those clients who have left it really late. You always get clients leaving everything to the last minute. Doesn't matter how much you tell them, but this is going to be really good for those clients, giving them that additional time. The one caveat that they state is, 2010 was released when Windows Server 2008 was in its heyday, and there are still some challenges around whether you are on the underlying OS that is not supported. So they are saying actually that you need to consider that, and you need to consider getting security updates for those out of support operating systems. But it will make quite a big difference for those clients who have kind of been panicking around how they get, everything moved in, 6 months. Now they have a year.
But if you can get it done in 6 months, please do.
Absolutely. Don't leave it till March. Don't leave it till February. Don't leave it till next year.
As a consultant, that's easy for us to say. That's easy for us to say, come and do the thing, come speak to us and things like that. But don't just get off it. Please start planning for it. Start getting the stuff there, because you're going to find yourself bitten by so many different things.
Yeah, I mean, SharePoint 2010 now, it is old. That is old.
Yeah, and there has always been that debate. Do I move or do I just bite the bullet and just keep it going? And then it's so different between Microsoft 365 and SharePoint 2010 are so completely different that it's more than just doing an upgrade of a SharePoint database. So considerations, but it's a good thing that Microsoft have recognised that this current situation is causing this one particular issue.
Absolutely.
They've actually, there's been a few announcements like this recently. This SharePoint one is obviously one that's in our domain. I've seen other announcements come out where they planned to kind of, I think one was Exchange, where they were planning to deprecate some authentication methods that are not so cloud friendly anymore, and they've said, actually we're going to leave this a while because we know that the pressures are on IT departments. It's not their focus at the moment, so trying to help those companies out. But like I say, it's don't use it as an excuse to not do it. It should be it's nice that this has happened, but we really should plan to move off these old methods or old services.
I'll try and find the link and add to show notes, but the security of the old versions of SharePoint is not great. There was a massive issue with a security hole with the UN, so you should be on the latest patch version. Anyway, the story about the UN's terrifying. The amount of data that was leaked from that was massive because they had an unpatched version of SharePoint, and it's not easy patching some of those old versions. Some of the on-premise ones is not easy either. But
and this is the thing. So this is that people are scared through to the cloud because they're not running it on their own tin, and they've not got people looking after it. This is the other side of it. If you don't do this, you can end up being in a worse situation. So it's back to that. Sometimes the cloud does have its benefits because it's always up to date. It's always patched. The security has always been looked at.
And there's far more security. It really depends on every situation, though, doesn't it? But it's good to see that Microsoft are taking these things into account.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another thing that I heard just before joining this was on the radio this morning. And I was watching a program last night as well around the development of smartphones, which was quite interesting. And one of the things that they talked about was how data is compressed and how human voice is actually compressed into telephone lines so that you can get more bandwidth. And I thought, that's interesting last night. And then I heard somebody talking about radio at the moment, how VoIP calls are having an impact on the quality of the interviews. And it struck me that a lot of what we were doing, and you mentioned it earlier, Gary, that we're doing a lot more online discussions, online conferences and things. And it struck me that actually, the mental focus that we have to piece together lower quality voice is something that, we're all doing an awful lot more now, because we're not using our traditional high quality voice lines or landlines. We're using VoIP, where the quality is intermittent, to say the least. So it's just something to think about, that, having spent all day doing an app in a day session and listening to people, and I was exhausted at the end of it. And I thought, now I know that's why. So that increased mental weight to actually piece together lower quality voice into things that we recognize.
That's very interesting, because I borrowed my son's, we got him like a £20 set of, I don't want to call them fake earpods, but they are lower quality than the AirPods.
Yeah.
Sorry, AirPods. And that's made me think on there that sort of quality doesn't go there. I might have to go back to the big headphones you've got, Gary.
I mean, you've got to remember, so as consultants, we will speak to clients quite a lot. And for me, one of the worst things is where you've got lots of people in a room around one speakerphone, and you're the remote person.
And you're trying to listen.
It's so difficult, and even now with people working from home, having a headset, having a good microphone is kind of vital to if you're running these kind of sessions remotely now. Making sure that people have headphones and a proper mic rather than using the laptop. Like something as simple as that can really
and they
help.
can be pretty cheap as well. The 15-20 quid ones work very nicely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm using the headphones that I use that I got with a phone, and actually they're really comfortable, and they've got good, but they are wired. So it's it was just struck me that these two things that I heard last night and this morning. Yeah. Another thing that caught my eye was the challenges of time around. So I noticed this week that Microsoft have issued a patch for Windows for Morocco, because for Ramadan they're changing the time zone just for Ramadan. So they are changing the time zone for a month. And I thought that's incredible. You've got one country in the world that they're changing the time zone for a month. And so therefore there's a Windows update going out in May to make sure that it switches the time zone back automatically, which it just made me sort of think around, when we're talking about all of these clients that are using the geolocation, they're using the translations, but you've got underlying things like the time zones, where you kind of think, wow, you've got to just take everything into account as the provider of a cloud service like Microsoft. It just struck me as being, wow.
I've got to say, if you haven't had time zone issues, you're not a real developer.
Absolutely.
Possibly excessive thing to say, but
yeah.
But it just struck me as really interesting that they've had to issue an update specifically for one country to do this.
I mean, thinking about this now, I mean, it's great because I didn't even know about this, and I didn't even know it was a thing. So, usually you're like, oh, daylight savings and those kind of things, and they're kind of painful to kind of handle. This is just, it's probably just throwing a spanner in the works and going, catch that one, guys, deal with that.
Absolutely. It is quite amazing when you think about it.
Have you seen any mention of any like date libraries or anything like that kind of changing for this? If that's interesting, because that's the one thing.
John Skeets, isn't it? John Skeets, who does a lot of the date I can't remember the name of it now, but he does a very good one. It'll be interesting to see what he's done with that.
Oh, and I've just seen. So we're using Teams obviously for this, and I've just seen a hand go up. So this is just launched in our tenant today and will be coming soon. So it will significantly help those meetings that are taking place over Teams, where you do have lots of people talking and you want to actually be able to put your hand up and have the talking stick pass to you next. So that's another thing that will increase the effectiveness of online meetings quite significantly, I think.
I think the speed of change that's coming through from Teams at the moment is pretty incredible.
Just so one last very quick item, and it's kind of a Microsoft thing and kind of not a Microsoft thing, but it's Microsoft have released an article which we'll talk about more in the second half. But one of the interesting things that they called out in it was the add-in for Outlook.com, and to be able to put in Zoom, so you can then create a Zoom meeting direct from your calendar. Which is quite an interesting one for all of those personal accounts at the moment, where people are actually, really using Zoom for all sorts of personal, I think it's right down at the bottom, but all sorts of personal meetings. So it's really interesting that they're just calling out that there is the ability to put in Zoom meetings direct. I think it's there, yeah, which is good. I mean, it shows Microsoft not being scared of everything else, and just reinforces that embracing of the way people work.
So is that just for the personal one, or that work for Office 365 Outlook as well?
I think that work for Office 365 out. It's an Outlook add-in, so it should work for. Yeah,
the consumer version of Outlook and the Office 365 version of Outlook for the web access is very similar now. I think the consumer version got lots of updates, and I think that they realized that this is quite good, so we'll move that across into Office 365. So yeah, it'll be the same models, I would have thought. Interesting that it says Skype or Zoom, not Teams. But, yeah.
Well, that's where I run them. But then I think that would be Skype, the personal version.
Yeah, Skype.
I know it's the personal version. Teams, but
yeah, no, that's it. You've got personal Teams now, which Microsoft are kind of. I think they had another announcement of increasing the functionality of the free version of Teams as well. So they're obviously seeing that as a key thing to obviously move people onto the Teams platform, and be interested to see where Skype then ends up.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I think we'll wrap up on the news there. A lot of news we covered, and some very interesting topics, but I think we'll call a halt to this part of the show and get on to how we can be productive and stay focused. And let's try and keep ourselves focused as well. So speak to you all in a minute.